Hi, it's Rob Moore here. I'm co-founder of Progressive Property. I'm with my business partner Mark Homer, who's also co-founder of Progressive Property. Now in this video, we're going to go through our top 10 predictions for the 2017 property market. I've got them on my rather small iPad. So we're going to be discussing landlord reactions to the buy-to-let tax changes. We're going to discuss prices in London and the rest of the UK. We're going to discuss property training. We're going to discuss outsourcing and a leveraged lifestyle and some of the new technologies we see coming into property. We're going to be discussing construction and labour costs. We're going to be discussing HMO landlords, the serviced accommodation category, which has seen a big growth area, Brexit fallout, we'll look forward to that one, commercial property, and then we're going to discuss lending. So they're the 10 things we're going to go through. So before we get into those, I've been in property now 12 years, Mark, a couple of years longer, 14, maybe 15. Mark's been in business over 20 years, me about 15. We're both in our sort of mid to late 30s, me a bit later than Mark. So I think we've got some good experience. We've bought, sold and managed about 700 properties. But because these are predictions and they're from our experience, they're not necessarily gospel. I don't really normally like doing predictions. I normally stay out of that, but we get asked a lot to do our thoughts in the market. We want to kind of get rid of some of the fear that a lot of people have. So I don't necessarily see ourselves as experts. We're always learning all the time. But hopefully you'll enjoy our discussion and we'd love you to carry on the debate. There may be some places to post comments or questions below this video, or you can contact us in the Progressive Property community because we want to debate these out and we want to get your thoughts. All right, Mark, so let's start with the big one that a lot of people are talking about in the buy-to-let sector, which is these tax changes and Clause 24. So can you explain what Clause 24 is, what the tax changes are, and then what you think the repercussions of that will be?
Okay, so in basic terms, the main change or the main change we've already seen is stamp duty going up. So there's 3% extra on all stamp duty or on the stamp duty you would pay on a buy-to-let property or a second home. On top of that, any purchases above about 940,000 have gone up as well. So stamp duty's gone up a lot. That went up in March 16, and since then there's been quite a big change. Coming forward to April 17, we're getting some other changes, which are the inability to offset all the mortgage interest against the rent. So that stuff that's coming. Yep. That's going to have a big impact because some people are going to be paying more in tax than they're actually receiving as profit. There are ways around it. Lots of people are going to incorporate, they're going to move to limited companies or buy new properties in limited companies.
And how does that help?
Well, effectively it sidesteps most of these new rules. The stamp duty is unchanged, so there's still the extra 3% even if you're buying a residential investment property. But you're able to offset all of the mortgage interest against the rent for tax purposes within a limited company. Okay. So that's the main change, but limited companies sidestep that.
All right, and I know you've been looking at moving quite a large number of our properties, personal name, into limited company. Yeah,
true.
And the reason for doing that or looking into that?
The main reason is just so we can offset all the mortgage interest against the rent for tax purposes. Yeah.
And then do we have to pay stamp duty? Is it seen as a sale?
Ordinarily you would have to pay stamp duty, but there are some ways around it using Section 15 of the 2003 Finance Act. Right. I think it's paragraph 18 and 20 allows a relief for you to avoid stamp duty in certain circumstances if you've been running it as a partnership stroke business. Yeah. And really you need to sit down with an accountant to go through that in a lot of detail to work out whether you're eligible or not. Okay. And the second kind of tax
just quickly on the accountant bit, is that a generic accountant or is that?
I would definitely see a property accountant on one who is well versed in this specific tax and these changes. I know when I first started going to see accountants, about these changes, it became quite clear to me that they were finding their way and they didn't really know what to do. Yeah. If we fast forward pretty much a year now, I know of a few accountants who have been putting these transactions through. incorporating portfolios, and they've been writing letters to HMRC. They've had barristers in to give them opinions on things. So it's those kind of accountants who have really worked on this. Yeah. Already incorporated quite a few landlords and really, dug deep to find answers to all the questions and gone to the right sources to get the right opinion on things. Yeah.
Okay. So are there any downsides of moving into a limited company, having your portfolios in the company and not in your personal name?
Well, there are downsides. When you own them in your personal name.
Which we used to do for years.
Yeah. And actually this would be one for you, Rob. The big upside is, we're going to be paying 20% corporation tax instead of 45% personal tax.
Because you've been asking me to move some of mine in for ages, haven't you? Or you think I should?
Move some of your...
personal properties into a company.
Well, yes, there's that. But also when it's personal, obviously you have access to all the money. You can just draw it out as you like and do whatever you want with it. As you move into a limited company, the taxation within the company is only 20%, and it's going to fall to 17 in the next few years because the government's bringing it down. Yeah. But the issue is, if you want to take the money out of the limited company, you've got to pay then tax on dividends, which is quite punitive, and it's quite difficult to get it out. Yeah. So being within a limited company is awesome for paying less tax if you don't draw it out. Yeah. For that reinvested compound effect. Yeah. So, if you're only paying 20% tax each year, you're up 25% on personal tax, and all that money can be reinvested. So then you're getting reinvested returns on the tax that you saved, and that just goes on and on and on, and it snowballs. So for me, that's quite exciting.
But how do you take the money yourself sometimes?
Well, there are various ways, and you need to sit down with an accountant to work that out. If it's lower amounts of money, then you can still pull it out, and there are tax. Yeah.
So just to jump in, I meet landlords every day, quite experienced ones, who still don't know all the things you can legitimately offset as an expense. Yeah, exactly.
A lot of people aren't legitimately offsetting all they can do. If you draw less, but over time, over your lifetime, every year you're going to get tax allowances for release of income from that company. Yeah. And you're going to be paying lower incremental rates of tax. So there are ways there, and there are other ways, which will be specific to you, and you'll be able to sit down with your accountant, go through everything, and you'll have to find other ways of drawing it out. You can lend money from that limited company to other limited companies that you have for further investment, for property, or for your business, or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And you can pay dividends between companies as well. So you might have a company just in your name, which isn't in your business partner's name or your property company or whatever, and you can draw the dividends out of any of the other limited companies which your company owns, free of any tax on dividends. Right. So that's quite positive.
So in our portfolio, we might end up having like 5 different companies, because there's my portfolio, there's your portfolio, there's our joint portfolio, there's yours and your stepdad's portfolio, and there's mine and my mum's portfolio. So they'll all be separate companies.
Yes, exactly. Now, one of the downsides to that is paperwork. Yeah. Each time you have a company, I know it's tax return, it's annual return, it's confirmation statement, it's accountant wants this, that, the other, and then that's times 6. Yeah. So there's quite a lot.
But we kind of have to do that anyway, don't we? Because of the volume of properties.
You just put it on your personal tax return, and it just gets divided by 2. Right. So there's less paperwork with your personal tax return. Yeah. There's a lot more reporting with a limited company.
Yeah, sorry, what I meant by that was because we've got properties in different partnerships or different people. Yeah. We couldn't have a company together and it have my mum's or your stepdad's properties within that, could it?
No,
because people do joint ventures, don't they, with different people? Yeah. So are you recommending that they have a separate company for Rob and Mark properties, and then say Rob and Harry properties and Mark and Tom properties?
That is the clearest and the normal course of events. Some people might have a partnership agreement or a deed of trust or something like that, but if you're going to build a reasonable sized portfolio, it's better to have a company where everything goes in and out of that company if the ownership is different.
Okay, fine. So let's now go to these the supposed lack of relief on interest.
Yeah.
and what you think that means. Because you stated earlier that it might look like we're going from a profit to a loss on a fairly low margin single let, and that could be a problem. So A, is it a problem, and are there ways sort of round that, if you like?
Yeah, so for people who don't have any mortgages on their properties, it's of no consequence because they've got no interest to offset anyway. But, for somebody who's relatively highly geared, they're paying quite a lot of mortgage interest in comparison to the rent they're receiving, and they may end up with a tax bill which is bigger than the net rental income that they receive.
Were you surprised about this change?
Well, I thought it was ridiculous. The first person that told me about it, I just kind of looked at them and thought, said, it'll never happen.
I never thought that would happen. It's sort of taxing on loans, essentially.
Well, it's a tax on turnover.
Yeah.
It's just nonsense. So I think.
So how do we turn the single lets back into profit then?
Well, you put them in a limited company.
Okay.
Or you might pay some debt down.
Yeah.
I mean, some accountants would, if you sat down with an accountant, and you maybe had just one or two properties and there wasn't a major amount of leverage on them, they may say just leave them where they are, or pay some debt down on them. Some people won't be moving into a limited company if they haven't got that much mortgage interest offset. And the other critical thing is, what incremental rate of tax are they paying? Are they a basic rate taxpayer or a higher rate taxpayer? If they're only paying a low rate of tax anyway, this won't make much difference to them.
Yeah.
Whereas if they're a 45% taxpayer already, or they're just on the threshold, this could push them into 45% tax, then they're going to have a big bill, and it's going to be worth incorporating, especially if they've got lots of properties.
Okay. There's quite a lot of talk, and I must admit, from a common sense point of view, purely on the numbers, I thought, well, maybe we could adjust our rents up a bit. You and I don't put our rents up a huge amount.
And we are at the moment.
Yeah, okay. Now, of course, we've got to think of our tenant as well. So it's not just like, let's slap it all onto them. Yeah. But in a way, they could be the victim if the landlords are putting their rents up.
Yeah, they will be the victim,
The landlords have got to make sure there's profit. Otherwise, what's the point in doing it? So you're saying we're putting our rents up at the moment?
Well, it's not you and I putting it up on properties that we already own. We usually, maybe we'll put them up 25 quid every couple of years, but you're right.
And that's on a what, 550, 600 rent?
Yeah, we're pretty soft actually, because if someone's been there for years, we'd much rather they be happy and try and keep them.
Yeah.
But on new properties, we're developing stuff at the moment. I'm bringing rooms on at the moment that a year ago were renting at 450 and 475.
Yeah.
We're now getting 500 minimum on those. On some, we're getting 550. We've just let a room at 625.
So you're saying the room rates are almost as high or more than like 3-bed cheapy single lets?
Well, 3-bed cheapy single lets 2 years ago, average rents 500, 525.
Just, if you don't know where we're from, just so you're watching, we're from Peterborough, so this is not average. London is a lot more. Up north it might be less.
So these are council, ex-local authority, 3-bed houses around Peterborough. 2 years ago might have been 500, 525. A year ago, 550, normal rate of growth. Today, 650 already, that's what they're achieving. Already talking, some of them are going at 675, and they're already talking about 700.
And do you think this is a result of this?
There's no question.
Yeah.
I suspect that a lot of it is the media, the negative talk around taxation for landlords. But I think even more immediate, and this is a direct result, I think, of the stamp duty going up in March. The stamp duty went up by an extra 3%, and I think that put a lot of landlords off buying. There's lots of demand from tenants, and it's still growing. The demand is, but clearly the supply of new rental properties that has been delivered over the past few years just hasn't been there since March of 16. So that's fallen off a cliff, and rents have started reacting.
Right.
And I think they're going to continue.
So net then, do you think we're any worse off?
Net, I think you and I are better off,
right,
because we're getting higher rents, and I can see what will happen is when our tenants move out, we're going to see rent rises of at least 100, 150 quid a property.
Which is like 20% or something like that?
Yeah.
It's quite a big jump.
Yeah. And any new properties we're bringing on, are much higher. The other thing I suppose we do with some tenants is we say, all right, will you sign a 12-month tenancy? If you won't, then your rent's going up another £10 a month.
Right.
So we'd give them a bit of a choice there. That can work it up slowly over time.
So generally, for the average landlord, are you saying the net difference isn't that much?
Well, it very much depends on their tax situation.
Yeah.
I've been through the calculation with various different landlords, and the amount of extra tax they pay varies widely depending on how much leverage they've got, how much mortgage interest they're paying, and how much tax, what percentage tax rate, incremental income tax rate they're paying. So for some, it's actually a benefit. For those who've not got much of a mortgage and I don't know, they're paying a low rate of tax, they're making a lot more money. But for those that have got much more, in terms of mortgages, then they may be worse off. But I suspect it's reasonably short term. And if those who've got a portfolio move into a limited company, they're going to be much better off, aren't they? Because they're going to be getting higher rents, and they're not going to have to pay any of these. They're going to be able to offset all of the mortgage interest to get against the rent.
Yeah.
Clearly, the stamp duty, there's no way around that. 3% extra. Well, on 150 grand single let, it's not loads. It's 3 or 4, 5 grand. People put it down to the cost of buying or get a bit more off the purchase price. With what we're doing, where we're buying commercial buildings, we're unaffected by that. Commercial buildings for conversion don't attract an extra 3%. It's one of the reasons I love buying stuff and developing it, especially at times like now when there's big stamp duty. Just done it on my own home.
So we'll come to that on number 9. So because I want to move on to number 2 in a moment. Just one thing I want to address, and I think this is regarding any change in property. When these changes were in, there was on some of the forums, some of the groups, some of the landlord communities, there was a lot of fear, wasn't there? And a lot of people are like, doom, death, over, single let, dead, out. And I've heard that being said a lot. I remember when Salem Rent Back got regulated and there were a load of landlords that were sort of out. And, there's been instances over the years where there's been a change. And generally, there's an upside or more upsides that balance the downside. So, for example, we're going to talk about service accommodation, which might not have been, people might not have been doing that as much if it weren't for these changes. We're going to talk about commercial property, which people might not have been doing as much if it weren't for these changes. So can you just talk about that just briefly, all the fear before and the reality, and just kind of what you think about that? Well,
you're right, it happens. This all happens periodically. Since I've been in this game, we had the sale and rent back stuff happened. And then we had the credit crunch, which was way bigger than any of this stuff. And of course, buy to let was dead for many years. We had it in the newspapers. I used to see people in the street and they'd say, how's life? Oh, you're in property, are you okay? And it was generally... It was
kind of quite good for them to think that, wasn't it? Because there's less competition.
There were so many cheap deals and, we bought a lot of great stock around that time. But, that was a period where the masses kind of thought it was a bad thing, but actually it was a great time to get in because it was all on sale, really, really cheap, and you could access it for not much money. And then, the people were saying, well, you can't get lending anymore. Lending's all finished. It's all stopped. But the reality was lending was still there.
It just changes.
You just had to go to more banks and find new lenders. As long as the deals were good enough, there was always a bank that would lend, maybe at lower loan to value or whatever.
And there was a lot more private finance, wasn't there, that came to the market then?
Loads more. So you had that. Obviously, interest rates went down, which helped massively on the cash flow, and yields increased massively as well. So there was the downside on the capital and the lending, but there was the massive upside on A, because they were cheaper, you were getting in at a much lower level, A. B, the yields therefore were higher. Rents sort of went up a little bit. Interest rates came down a lot. And it's it just made it a better market to get into and a much lower risk market. So
I still think there'll be some upsides come out of all these changes. Well, don't know, I can't predict them yet because it's still quite raw.
Well, I can tell you straight away that the income and the yields now are going to soar. I'm sure of it. I can see the evidence in our letting agency. People talk about stuff, rents will go up and, You know, there's all this load of hogwash in the media about what's going to happen, and you know what it's like. Predictions are often wrong, and until I see the evidence, I tend to. I keep one eye on it, but I tend to reserve judgment. But I am seeing those rents growing very strongly at the moment, and I suspect it's happening throughout the Midlands.
And what you see with prices, people think prices are like sort of steadily up and rents are steady, but they're not, are they? They do nothing for ages and they go like that, and then nothing for ages, and sort of the moves are quite quick.
Yeah.
And you're obviously seeing that. Okay, great. So we need to move on to number 2. So let's talk about prices in London versus the rest of the UK, because I think we've both got some thoughts on that. I know London's been strong until recently, so just tell us over the last sort of couple of years what you perceive's happened in London.
Yeah, so the last couple of years in prime central London, so, you know, the really sexy stuff, I don't know, it might be Knightsbridge or...
Zones 1, 2...
Yeah, Mayfair or Kensington, Chelsea, all those really, really kind of primey areas, where the most valuable property in the country is. Those areas have been falling in value, so properties have been dropping.
In the last how long?
The last couple of years.
Yeah. And because they've been really growing a lot before
then. They grew massively. So from 2010, the cycle started, and it usually always starts in those areas.
Yeah.
They grew first. Peterborough was still in recession, in effect. And, you know, you had that, the most valuable property in the country.
So it's like London's its own world, country.
It's its own ecosystem. Yeah. And as that grew massively, and, you know, it didn't just grow a few percent. I mean, there was huge, hundreds of percent it grew from 2010. And it went too far, probably.
Affected by a lot of overseas money coming in, do you think?
Yeah, a lot of overseas money, a lot of money that had been waiting around through the recession, for the values to stop falling. Interest rates dropped through the floor. You know, people needed a return. Yeah. It's very sexy. They're trophy buildings. Everyone knows it's the safest place.
No one from Russia and Qatar wants to buy properties in Peterborough, do they? Well, so they want the Trophy London buildings.
A few of them are moving out now.
All right, okay. Watch this space then.
But yeah, most of them want the trophy stuff because they've seen it on TV, and you know,
and often they're not that bothered about yield, are they? They just need to get their money out of the.
Need to get their money out, and they see it as a very safe long-term thing. So very, very good growth, but in the last couple of years, actually, it's been dropping back. Now, the trigger for that was there were. Not only have there been changes to the stamp duty regime for buy-to-let, there were changes with residential properties in general. So if you buy a residential property over about 930,000, stamp duty has gone up significantly.
Right, and in London you don't always get a lot for that kind of money.
That's the point. The stacks of properties in London over £1 million. Stamp duty on those properties is now eye-watering. Yeah. If you're over about, I worked out the other day that a property of I've just moved into, or I'm just moving into my new home, and the value will be about 1.25, 1.3 million, and the stamp duty on that unit to buy at that level will be 70,000. Yeah. That is tax just to purchase that property. And to purchase it at the level that I bought it at.
And you get a lot for that money here as well, don't you?
Yeah, you get stacks. It's like a 7-bed house. Yeah. But, you know, to purchase that property initially, you know, when we bought it, it was 600, because obviously
this links to number 9 about why you like doing conversions.
Exactly.
Because the more you spend on the development, the less you're paying on the stamp.
Exactly. So I ended up paying, I don't know, 20.
And you use your personal relief as well.
Yeah, and ended up, I don't know, spending, say, 22, 23, 24,000 on stamp duty, buying at 600, and then doing a.
But what happens when your fiance is in charge of the refurb and the budget goes up a little bit?
You get into a lot of trouble. Of trouble with that. But what the point I'm trying to make is that properties over £1 million, the stamp duty has gone up massively. You know, it has gummed the market up. Yeah. In fact,
just quickly, because what people do in reaction then is, I guess, they offer less to try and offset the not paying the stamp duty.
Yeah, they do.
Common sense tells you if the stamp duty has gone up, offer less to accommodate the difference in stamp duty. Yeah. And so then it slows the prices down.
Yeah. Well, in those kind of primary areas, you can be looking on purchases now, big purchases, of spending 10% or more of the value of the property on stamp duty.
I can see you don't approve by the look on your face.
Well, I started working it out the other day because I don't buy residential properties at that level.
No.
Makes
you grateful to not be in London.
Well, I mean, it's just incredible. You know, you're in a 10 million quid place, and you're probably going to be spending over £1 million in stamp duty.
Yeah.
Now there's quite a lot of properties over £1 million in London.
Yeah.
So these increases have effectively gummed the market up.
Yeah.
In fact, I heard that last year there were 30 transactions over a certain level, can't remember the exact number, in Kensington and Chelsea. It's fallen off a cliff.
Yeah.
So that was what kind of precipitated it.
Yeah.
And then clearly the market had gone too far in terms of the capital values anyway, and people were less interested. But they have, for the last couple of years, have been falling. Other areas where there's been oversupply, you know, you might have the Battersea Power Station or some of those kind of units. They're there's far too many flats. There's a lot of new build, and values are falling in areas like that.
So through 17, do you think that will continue, or do you think that will change?
I think there's probably still more stock, than buyers. A hell of a lot got built within London.
So stay the same or drop a bit?
I think it'll probably drop a little bit. Yeah.
Okay.
I think there's still more stock.
Yeah.
The stock needs to be taken up before the values.
Yeah.
Of
course.
Stop falling.
And because we're in Peterborough, which is only 75-ish miles,
Yeah.
and it's 50 minutes on the train.
Yeah.
And I live 4 or 5 minute walk from the station. And my property's gone up nearly 20% since I bought it.
Yeah.
And I bought it just over 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Now I know it's the higher end, not the lower end. So certainly, because it's funny how people think, I mean, I know we just talked about London, but you were talking about specifically central. But everything seems to go at a slightly in its own little different cycle.
Yeah.
So for example, the lower end and the higher end, a different cycle. Often the lower end is the first to grow, but to recover, but the first to fall because it's higher debt sometimes.
Yeah, or it's probably area specific, but
certainly at the higher end in Peterborough, we're still getting quite a lot of growth.
Yeah.
And we're only 75 miles away from London that's done the opposite.
And the lower end in Peterborough, I think almost all of it around Peterborough is still growing. But interestingly, there's the ripple effect.
Yeah.
So, prices rise in London. It takes a while
I
for
think
that
it
to move out.
Years.
Does take years.
Totally years.
Does take years because what happens is, somebody's living in 1 Acacia Avenue. Let's say they're in Knightsbridge. Their flat's worth 500 grand. 2 years, 3 years later, it's worth £1 million. Well, that's realistic. That's the sort of thing that's happened. Things worth £1 million. Suddenly they have a baby. They think, oh God, we need something bigger.
Yeah.
They have a look around and they want to buy a house, and it's £2.5 million.
Yeah.
And 5 minutes ago, they were struggling to pay for something that was 500.
And in Peterborough, you get a 4-bed detached with double garage for 300 grand.
So they move to Peterborough.
But that takes time.
It takes time. They move out, and of course, there's then a new buyer in London. And maybe that's a foreigner or whatever. A lot of the people within London end up moving out and commuting in because the prices are so. Diverge. They're so different.
And the more the price spreads, there's a differential, the more people you get relocating, and the less so, the less.
Yeah, and then
because they've got the train fares and the time and the commute.
Yeah, and then towards the end of the cycle, further into the cycle, the prices they don't come together, but there's less difference between London and somewhere like Peterborough or the Midlands or the North.
Yeah, because people always talk about sort of the property cycle as if every area in the UK is moving at the same pace.
No.
Totally different. And I'm often very surprised how long it takes to ripple out. Because if you're saying London has really been dropping over the last 2 years, so it's into its third year.
Yeah.
So we must be at least 4 years behind in Peterborough because we're still...
Could be. There's the other thing is the stamp duty, the anomaly with the stamp duty. I went shooting on Friday, and I was there with a developer who builds big houses around Stamford, and not far from Peterborough. And his market is the £1 million to £2.5 million kind of range, and they're new. He just builds new houses, And he told me that those houses were not shifting at all anymore.
Right.
He said he's had to reduce quite a few of them. He said the market's dead at that level, all because of stamp duty, and he's moved to the 5 to 800, 5 to 900 because of stamp duty.
Yeah.
And he said that stuff's really going well. It's growing really well, but the stuff over £1 million, he said it's not selling like it was.
So we're not experts of Midlands, the North, because, you know, our areas are Peterborough. Mark spends a fair bit of time in London, so we'd probably have to make a relatively generic statement on that, and many people who are there would know their market better. One would assume, from what we're saying, that it will take even longer to ripple out up north, perhaps.
Always does.
Still good yields up there, isn't there, from what everyone tells me?
Still great yields, but it just takes longer for the capital values to adjust to what's been happening in the south.
Okay, so before we move on to point 3, Mark and I, before we started shooting the video, were having this interesting discussion about the stamp duty. And Mark, you said something interesting about the gross receipts of stamp duty income has dropped, even though in their wisdom they've increased the percentage of stamp duty. Yeah,
and this happens, you know, all around the world when you put a tax rate up significantly, it puts people off, and they just think, well, sod it, I'm not going to do that thing. Why should I give, you know, X massive percentage of my work to the government? So they just don't do that thing anymore. So they get less activity. So less people buy houses over £1 million, and you know, less people buy the kind of properties or the values of the properties that the government's now taxing highly. Therefore, the government collects less stamp duty.
So this, in the infinite wisdom of increasing the stamp duty rates, they've collected less money.
Yeah.
So you said off camera before that you think maybe they might have to backtrack then, because they've lost money doing this.
Well, clearly the pressure will continue to build on government from, you know, developers, homeowners, whoever, the public, and over time they're probably going to have to do make some sort of further change. Now they won't want to backtrack. You know, they won't want to be accused.
They won't want to lose face.
Yeah, they won't want to lose face, and, you know, be accused of backtracking. But they're going to have to do something. Otherwise, properties at the top end are just going to stop selling, or they have stopped selling.
It happens with benefits, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So they drop the benefits, or the landlords move to private.
Yeah.
They increase the benefits, the landlords move to benefits. And actually, to be fair, I know we sort of said infinite wisdom. It must be quite a difficult balance for them to get right.
I think it is difficult, and what makes it even more difficult is the politics that they are controlled by. These guys are playing to the gallery. There are all these people, you know, who they want to vote for them. And if the majority of the people who are going to be voting for you don't earn, you know, they earn a lot less and can't afford £1 million house, then of course they're not going to be voting for lower stamp duty on those houses and more stamp duty on the 100 grand, 200 grand houses.
And they probably love the thought of the richer people getting taxed a lot more.
Of course. So it's politically popular. If you look around the world to the states that collect the least in terms of percentage tax rate, I don't know, somewhere like Singapore, actually their collection rate and the amount they collect per capita are some of the highest. You know, you speak to people high up in HMRC and they say, you know, actually we'd love to reduce, you know, overall tax rate, just simplify them and have a flat rate, because we'd probably collect more tax and it would be simpler. But politically we could never do it, because the majority of people, you know, who are effectively voting in politicians, will end up having to pay more tax, because at the moment the very rich are subsidising the poor or the middle incomes.
Okay, great. So moving on to prediction number 3, is that more landlords and property investors will move into property training. So Mark and I started buying properties together in 06. You were buying 04, 05. And then we got to about 20-ish buy-to-lets, and then we wrote our first book jointly together. And then we got about another 30, and we started running some education material online audio courses. So we were about 50 properties-ish once we started scaling that up, and Progressive Properties become the UK's biggest property training company. And we have 105 trainers who train for Progressive, one of our companies. And so I feel that there's going to be more buy-to-let landlords, HMO landlords, service accommodation, business people, commercial conversion exponents who are going to be sharing some of their knowledge, maybe writing some more books. Rent-to-rent books are out on the market now, and there's going to be more people training. And I think that has an upside and a downside. And I think that the upside is the access to information for all of us who are entrepreneurs, property investors, is quicker, faster, easier, better, and probably cheaper. As more trainers come into the market, there's more competition in the education space, so that keeps prices pretty competitive. There's one of our courses, we run a 4-day property investing masterclass, which the price hasn't gone up in the last 7 years, but it's twice as long as it used to be. And that is, through to competitive market conditions. So I think that's a great upside. So new people getting in, there's going to be more educational choices for you. The downside is that there might be some people getting into education and training that maybe haven't got a huge amount of experience yet. So if you're looking into getting training support and education in your property investing journey, make sure that you do your diligence on the trainers, make sure they've got a property in portfolio themselves and they're not just going in to jump in and be a trainer because it's quite easy at the moment. Because if you think social media and all these online platforms and all this new technology with Facebook live feeds and the ease at which video can be translated across platform just with an internet connection means far more people can communicate and build a following and build a brand. Okay, so prediction 4 is about where some of these single let investors who may be a bit disillusioned by single let or are looking for higher yields or returns might move. So Mark, have you got some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think they're going to be looking for higher yielding assets. So lots of people out of London are likely to move into the Midlands and further north for single lets. And then some of the people who are currently doing single lets may be buying more HMOs now, or they might be doing serviced accommodation, or things that provide them with a higher yield. Therefore, they're going to be able to, have the money to pay this extra tax if they're keeping them in their own name. Or, as we'll talk about shortly, they're going to be able to meet lenders' new requirements to get buy-to-let loans because they're becoming more stringent.
Yeah. Okay. So I've definitely seen a bit of a movement in people being prepared to travel. So something we've always said in Progressive for the last 11 years is you want to buy as close to where you live as possible. Now, we don't confuse that with local because, if you live in Kensington, you can't get the single let yields. You might choose Milton Keynes, or you might choose Peterborough or Stevenage, or some people even will go up to Hull. Now, whilst I don't think it's wise to go from Kensington to Hull, people do that because they're chasing the yield. And I think the important thing to say at the moment is there seems to be a little bit more of a movement of people prepared to travel a little bit more to get a yield, but you've got to factor in the travel, the opportunity cost of your time and the increased extra costs of more remote investing. And people don't put that, like you see deal analyzers and spreadsheets. Well, people never put in their spreadsheet if they've got to go 40 or 50 miles further north to build their portfolio. They don't put in the travel time, they don't put in the extra management and maintenance. And I think that's really important. Can you also talk a bit about the extra demand for serviced accommodation and HMOs? Do you think there's more demand for that because of the buy-to-let changes? Or do you think there's more demand for that because of the supply and demand differential of too many people and not enough houses, or both?
Well, I think that there will be increased demand for all categories of rental property because there is less supply because of these changes. So rents, on most of these categories are going to go up. In terms of serviced accommodation, that's a little bit different. Really,
it's more of a business, isn't it?
It's more of a business, and it's competing with the hotel space because it's a nightly rental. So there is growth in that sector, and it's not affected by these tax changes. And actually, serviced accommodation isn't, and neither are holiday lets. They're a separate thing. So
driven predominantly by Airbnb and groups like that,
Airbnb and Booking.com, those kind of sites. So maybe you won't see rents in those areas rise so much, but the cash flow and the income that a lot of investors are getting from those areas is already much, much greater. That's becoming more and more penetrative into our psyches. There are lots of people who would still book a hotel, but they wouldn't necessarily book a flat, myself included, when they go to a town, but more are trying it and liking it and using Airbnb and Booking.com and getting onto it. So I suspect it will penetrate that way.
Yeah. Do you think also the big differential between the number of houses that are needed and the amount of people that need them has driven more conversions and more room rentals?
I think that's definitely the case. I think the housing crisis continues to grow. Each successive government comes out with some amazing plan that they're going to build this many houses, or they're going to get the housing associations to build X number more houses, or they're going to do a help to buy scheme. And yes, these schemes help. Yes, they push it forward a little bit, but the key is the numbers. They're always quite small. They say, there's going to be this many thousand houses. Well, you need 300,000 houses being built every year just to keep up with demand. And we've got all the backlogs since the Barker report, I think it was 2003. So this has been going on for years and years and years. The planning system is broken. Now, something that could affect this, significantly, I won't hold my breath because, of course, politicians have spoken about this for a hell of a long time and then end up doing nothing, is the new white paper on housing. And that is due any day now. It was supposed to be the end of last year. They're talking about it coming out in the early part of 2017. That could deal with the planning system. It has the potential to do that and to encourage a big house building program. But of course, how big that's going to be, what the numbers are, whether they're just going to be tinkering around the edges, and whether they, like each successive government before them, has done, if they effectively back out and don't go through with all of the tough decisions and push all the focus groups and the pressure groups and all these people who are going to be complaining about this big building program in their backyard. If they don't stand up to that and change the planning system and relax a lot of the rules, then we're going to continue with the current low numbers of supply, new build supply, versus demand. And I think there's a good chance that it won't deal with it again, but it could bring some changes.
Yeah, I also think that there's a bit of an acceptance of a lifestyle change. And if you think 80 years ago, how they built houses, how big they were, reception rooms, hallways and everything else, and you look at how they're building them now, and new builds, they put 3/4 length beds in and they put mini furniture in to trick you into thinking that there's a lot more space. And of course, that's a balance of developers trying to make up for a better margin, because the days of, a third are gone. There's no a third profit in new build anymore, so they'll say. So the developers are always looking to stretch margin, and if they can reduce floor space, that's one way of doing it. But also I think people are now more accepting of living in smaller spaces. Like if Japan or some of these other countries where the population is massive, you remember when they had the yotels that they built out there, and people would literally stay in a little pod, and very much used to living in smaller space there. And I'm seeing a shift now that people are more accepting in living in smaller accommodation. And I just think the world is changing. You got any thoughts on that?
Well,
you're building smaller rooms, aren't you?
People who were born in the 80s, 90s, they're millennials. They're more footloose, first of all, and they have this attitude. I'm not going to save for a deposit because I just want to spend it on enjoying my life. And B, even if I had the money, I don't want to buy because I want to be able to move around for work and whatever. I'm not interested in buying a house, or I will, but I'll do it much later. So there's a definite shift there. The second thing is...
Because people have jobs a lot less now, don't they, as well? They jump jobs.
They move around a lot more. The labour market is a lot more flexible, and people travel further and they work from home and all that sort of stuff. So I think people are more accepting and more interested in renting. The other thing is that lots of people find living in a HMO or some sort of shared accommodation as more normal.
And it's a bridge from going from living with your parents to a big house, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what we found is, whereas HMOs and shared accommodation are cluster flats as we do them, whereas that might have been low-end accommodation years ago, now actually there are some really nice, sexy, high-end HMOs, which is pretty much, we do quite a lot of those. We'll roll the cluster flat model out where we have 15 or 20 or in one case we've got 38 rooms in a building. Obviously they're split up into flats of 6, so people don't feel like they're living with any more than 5 other people. But when you do something like that and you give them an ensuite and you give them a really nice spec and it's all cleaned and it's got Wi-Fi and they've got a nice massive TV and it's convenient, actually they like that model. Now, going through this year and into 2018, there are going to be quite a few regulatory changes coming, especially for that kind of accommodation. I think HMO licensing is going to be extended across all HMOs of 5 or more people. At the moment, it has to be 5 or more people and of 3 stories.
Yeah.
Whereas, there's lots of people, myself included, who would intentionally do a 1 or 2 story HMO so that you haven't got to go down the licensing route. We still do all the, we put the fire doors in and all the overdoor closers and the smoke detectors and everything like that. So I think what's going to happen is there's been a consultation that's come out. The government have asked for all the responses. Surprise, surprise, the consultation says that 80% people support the new changes. It all seems to be set up that way.
Yeah.
And the government say they're going to introduce a load of new licensing rules for HMOs now. And I think what that's going to do is it's going to force out a lot of the real low-end operators. Obviously they're going to go right through the fire and they're going to make sure that things habitable and warm and all the normal stuff. But in addition to that, there's going to be room size requirements. If there's no separate kitchen or if there is no separate lounge, they're going to require a minimum room size of 10 metres squared.
Right.
Now, we've been doing our rooms for 10 metres squared and we provide a lounge kitchen diner because I find it's easier to let and you get much more rent, you give them good quality accommodation, that's great. But there are loads of rooms that don't meet that standard. So I suspect there are going to be loads of landlords dragged out by a lot of these new licensing regimes and regulations, along with the tax changes that are coming. So those who are in the market want to do a really good product, want to do it properly, get it licensed, and buying a limited company. Actually, I think your rents are going to go up and up, and you're just going to have less landlords to compete with.
Yeah.
So I see that as a positive, as long as you can move in the right direction and adapt to the changes.
Yeah. We've always said if you do something better than your competition, it's probably going to have sustainability and longevity. So if you really good quality rooms, I know you've gone much more higher end, haven't you, recently than you maybe did over the last few years.
If you get a single let and you do a really, really sexy 3-bed council single let that normally rents for $650, you might end up getting £700 a month. Yeah. It's an increase of less than 10%. You do a really high-end room versus a pretty crappy room. A crappy room in Peterborough might be $350 a month. A really high-end room could be $550.
Yeah.
The increase is so much more.
Yeah.
It's more like a hotel room. You can drive the yield with good spec.
Yeah.
So it's worth spending the money.
Yeah, and if you're doing a lot of rooms, you've got economies of scale of the furniture and the equipment and everything else.
You do much higher end furniture, put really nice floors in, get an interior designer in to make it look good, something I can't do.
So you decided to get married to one.
And you can make it something that actually you'd like to live in. I thought to myself, if I ever got made homeless, I lost everything.
Go and live in one of your own flats.
Do you know what? I'd live in one of those rooms.
Yeah.
And that was a bit of a turning point for me when I thought to myself, I'd live in one of these.
Yeah.
Own ensuite.
Because you normally like to keep the costs really lean, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I would live in one of those rooms, and I think that's a pretty good benchmark.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks, Mark. So, prediction 5 then is about technology and future tech, if you like. So something that didn't really seem to happen a few years ago was what's called vagabonding. So there's a book called Vagabonding, and it's basically about kind of getting rid of all your possessions and living in a minimalist way, and kind of not having a fixed abode, if you like. And there's quite a popular podcaster called James Altucher, and he's kind of followed this vagabonding model. And he doesn't live anywhere. He has like 5 possessions, and he Airbnbs, and he just lives in Airbnbs and just moves from Airbnb to Airbnb to Airbnb to Airbnb to someone's house, little room. And there's a little bit of a sort of culture and a trend of that. It's kind of started in America, and it's likely to move over here. And with Airbnb, and sort of, it's not just Airbnb, but the ease of use of the app, and the Internet of Things, where pretty much everything that's got a circuit could connect to the internet, and virtual reality. I think we're going to see more of a movement into some of these. They're not new technologies. I mean, Internet of Things isn't new, and virtual reality isn't new, but they're kind of new in the sort of the more mature property market, if you like. So what some very progressive estate agents do, no pun intended, not progressive property, some very progressive estate agents are starting to do viewings on Snapchat. And I predict, I don't think it's been happened yet, but I predict that there will be an estate agent that will do virtual reality viewings. And imagine that, I know Samsung now have a virtual reality headset that you put your phone in like that, and you get VR. And imagine the convenience of you being able to do viewings in a VR headset, which of course, as the technology develops, that'll get a lot more realistic. They're even talking about having the smells come through. If you're a deal packager and you sell deals, imagine how convenient that's going to be for you to be able to go and film around the property. You've probably seen those 360-degree videos you can now do just from your iPhone on Facebook. And then you're going to be able to do viewings for all your potential buyers of your package deals through virtual reality. So Internet of Things, virtual reality, further growth in the app-related systems like Airbnb and Booking.com, etc. Many people now, if you look in the property forums, they're running remote property businesses, and they might have their properties in their local area, they might have them up north if they're down south. But they're able to run most of their property portfolio through their phone by using all app-related inventory systems and note and file sharing systems and to-do lists that are shared between people they might have on outsourcing websites. They might use virtual assistants. So I think that this is, the progressive people, the innovators, they're already doing this, and they literally are already running their life and their business from their phone. Mark and I travel quite a lot, and I only really need this or this to run a business. And I think we have 72 staff at Progressive Property and Progressive Property Lets, and we're able to run that business from anywhere in the world. And I think that there's going to be more tools and apps and tech for you to be able to do that. And B, I recommend that you get more into doing that, because I think there's a big difference between a landlord and an investor. And a landlord is someone who's very hands-on, very up to date with the laws and the contracts and how you should be. And maybe even some of them manage the properties themselves. And they might have a small portfolio, 5, a dozen max. And they're very hands-on, and it's quite a time-consuming thing. And then there's the investors who are looking for a bit more leverage. Maybe they use letting agents, and they use the progressive letting agents, and they embrace all of these apps and all of this technology. And they get to a point a year, 2 years in, where maybe they don't need to do as much day to day as the landlord. They might only have to work 10 or 15 hours a week instead of maybe 40 or 50. Now, we all know you have to work hard enough not to have to work hard. So it's not like you're, sitting on a beach drinking pina coladas and, all the money rolls in. But there's pretty much an app and a piece of new technology for everything you want to do in your property business, so that you can have a lifestyle business rather than be a hands-on landlord. Okay, on to prediction 6, which I'm going to be handing over to Mark, and that is on the change of lending criteria. There's some movement there, isn't there?
So what's happened is as I think as part of this onslaught on landlords, where taxation's gone up and and they're talking about bringing more licensing in. They're also making the lending standards more stringent, and the Prudential Lending Authority have said that banks need to stress test the income, i.e. the rent, to a higher level when deciding whether to give a mortgage or not. Basically what it means is you're probably going to be assessed with some lenders of needing a rent of 145% of the mortgage payment, but they're going to assume a mortgage payment of 5.5% instead of the current 2.5%.
And what was this ratio before 145%?
125% of pay rate, which might be 2.5% mortgage. Massive. It's, on low-end properties, it'll mean a 20 to 30 grand increase in, or should I say it will mean a 20 to 30 grand decrease in the amount of mortgage that each lender will provide.
Right.
So these rules have come out. Lots of lenders are still at 125%, but most of them are calculating the rent stress on 5.5%. I've seen a few in the 4s, and that makes a very big difference. So there's been this shock, certainly on the lower end stuff. The mortgages are, I'd say, 20 grand less than they were 6 months ago in terms of the amount you can borrow up to. So the loan to values are basically coming down. So I suspect as the year goes on, you'll probably see some new lenders, and maybe some of the lenders will spot that there's a bit of an opportunity here, because the rules aren't completely set in stone, and I think some of the smaller lenders may find ways round them. So there's been this initial shock. Lending's changed quite significantly, but I suspect that may ease up as we go into 17.
Okay. I mean, lending does kind of periodically change, doesn't it? And initially, some changes like this make it look like it's going to be really hard to get money, but the banks need to lend money, don't they?
The banks have to lend money, and that's their business. They're making money out of lending you money. Through the credit crunch, they had less money, and of course they were lending less, but they still had to lend. They still had to make money, and they wanted to write new loans. They just did them only to the best borrowers and found excuses with lots of the population not to lend to them and just to pick the cream out. Yeah.
So do you think then, moving through 17, if it's 145% ratio with most lenders, do you think there'll be other lenders trying to find a way to lend you more or make it easier? Or do you think it'll be harder?
Well, I think it'll be harder.
Initially or through the whole year?
Well, I think all through the year it will be harder than it was in 2016. I think that's sure. That's for sure. But I suspect there will be more lenders, maybe smaller lenders and new market entrants, finding a way of basically increasing the loan to value and relaxing the rent stress in some way. You can already see a couple of them trying to do it.
Yeah.
And I suspect there'll be more products through 17 as we go through.
Okay. Generally, when lending is harder, prices are softer. So do you think that will be reflected in values? Do you think prices will soften?
No, because buy-to-let might be, let's say it's 15% of the market.
Yeah.
Maybe it's 20%. I don't know, what percentage is mortgaged properties, but it may be around that zone.
Yeah.
So if the market's only, say, 15% of all the properties, well, it's probably not going to have a massive effect. It will have a big effect on how many landlords buy properties to rent out, because they need bigger deposits. Have a big effect on that.
Yeah.
But the wider housing market is, it's the biggest portion of it is still the owner occupier, and will be driven by the lending that they can obtain and the stamp duty on it and their income and how good they feel and the economy. The economy's still growing. Yeah. People unemployment is still low. Wages are rising. We're seeing that here in Progressive. So I think capital values will continue to grow through 17. Maybe not at the levels that they were in 16, but I suspect you're going to get 5% capital value growth again in 2017.
Okay. Something we did see when we had the last recession, property correction, when the lending reduced quite significantly from the banks, is we saw more private investors, private individuals, high net worths, even sort of mum and dad money coming into the market. So if the banks end up lending less, or it's harder so they lend less, do you think maybe we'll have more private finance coming into the market, or maybe an increase in crowdfunding or anything like that?
I think that's inevitable whilst interest rates stay so low.
Yeah.
If lenders won't do it, then, if a lender's only going to lend 60% loan to value or 50% loan to value, lots of people might go and borrow the extra 20 or 25% of someone else on a second charge and maybe pay them 5%.
Yeah.
That's going to be quite an interesting product. I suspect if that's the way it goes, then there'll be lenders out there that will do that sort of stuff.
Yeah. See, something I've seen over the complete cycle is sort of people think that there's more money or less money. And of course, when the recession happened and, a lot of banks went bust, the banks lost the money. But money doesn't just sort of evaporate out of the world. It just moves, just goes into different places. So generally, I've found when banks lend less or it's harder, there's other disruptive lending. We had the Bank of Dave, didn't we? And we had all these crowdfunding platforms. And certainly I saw many more what you might call non-professional or non-sophisticated investors, lenders coming into the market. So many people you heard borrowing money from their mum and dad or things like that. So it'll be interesting to see. Of course, I don't think I'd like to predict on whether we'll see a lot more of that. But certainly what you see with money is very liquid and it moves and it flows. And I wouldn't want anyone to think that if the banks are lending less, there's going to be less money. It just might come from a different place. Moving on to prediction 7 is the one that everybody's been talking about, and that's Brexit. So, Mark, conversation, what do you think Brexit, the fallout, what does it mean? What do you think might continue to happen through 17?
I think the main differences for us as property investors are the amount of Eastern European tenants that Brexit will create for us, or will, the amount of Eastern European tenants that will reduce as a result of it. Certainly in the run-up to the vote, there was a record amount of Eastern European immigration into the UK up till June 2016. And around the vote, or immediately afterwards, some of the local recruitment agencies who take those kind of people in, and put them in the picking fields or in factories or whatever, said there was definitely a big dip. But actually, the evidence that we're seeing within our letting agency and talking to other investors is that Eastern European immigration is rising again. There are maybe less Polish, but for some reason there are loads of Bulgarians and Romanians coming over now.
Right.
And what they're trying to do is beat the deadline. We're still in the EU, the UK. They're still allowed in. So those who were thinking about coming in, lots of them are getting in now because when we Brexit, according to Theresa May, that's going to be the end. And we're not going to take Eastern European immigration, according to her. We'll see what actually happens, because I don't think they've got a clue what's going to happen yet. But she's effectively saying there's not going to be this open door immigration policy. It's going to be a points-based system. They're going to have qualifications or be bringing something to the country in terms of a trade or whatever. So they're not going to be able to come in. So these Eastern European investors, a lot of those rent rooms, rent houses, all that sort of stuff that landlords are interested in. So clearly that fuels rent rises and reduces the amount of properties available, which is probably quite good for landlords and quite good for investors. So what will Brexit mean? Well, clearly it's a very, very long-term play. It could take 10 years to come out.
Because there was a lot of fear and a lot of noise and a lot of doom when it happened. And I don't want to undermine it by saying I felt it was a storm in a teacup. But what I did feel, because the pound did go down and there was obviously some import-export challenges and everything else, and things did change, but I didn't feel it was really as bad as what a lot of landlords or people who are more sort of pro-business thought. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it wasn't as immediately bad as a lot of, as the media would have had you believe, or the politicians on both sides were trying to get us to believe.
You were shocked, weren't you, when it happened?
Yeah, and no one, most of the establishment thought it wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
So it happened And the immediate effect was sterling fell through the floor, the stock market fell a lot, and there was a shock to the system.
Yeah.
But, you know, very quickly that recovered in terms of the stock market. In fact, the stock market's way higher now, so over 7,200 than it was pre the Brexit vote. So the immediate impact was actually much reduced.
Yeah.
But we still haven't come out of the EU.
No.
So the impact of Brexit is still unknown, and it's just going to take a lot longer for this stuff to play out and for us to see the results.
Yeah.
So that was, you know.
Are you recommending carry on doing what you're doing and watch? You can't sit on your hands forever, can you?
Can't sit on your hands. I think you just crack on, because we've no idea what the results are going to be. The politicians don't even know what Brexit looks like, or how long it's going to take, or what the EU will accept, you know, or the other member states will accept. So why wouldn't you just carry on? The UK economy, this is no exaggeration, the UK economy is the fastest growing developed economy in the world today.
Right.
So, you know...
Is that a good thing?
Well, I think it's a great thing. Our economy is in excellent health, it's in rude health.
Yeah.
You know, it was before the vote, and that has continued. So, you know, you know, of the advanced economies, we're in the best shape at the moment. So, you know, that's likely to mean continuing wage increases, probably unemployment reducing, you know, for the foreseeable future. You know, more economic growth, which in the long term can only mean price rises. You know, rents go up, house prices go up, you know, prices in the general economy go up. So I think the UK generally is a great place to invest.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned a bit about there may be a reduction in immigration. Is that going to affect maybe HMOs and multi-lets? Many people in many areas have a lot of Eastern European tenants. Do you think it might have any impact in that sector? Well,
it could do, but again, it's just unknown. So far, it's having no effect. In fact, the stack's coming over. We're getting, you know, houses and rooms let to English people and to, you know, Eastern European, you know, people who have immigrated recently from Eastern Europe. So, you know, there's still plenty of them. So that remains to be seen.
Yeah.
But, you know, there's such a supply issue. You know, there's not enough properties coming on for rent or to buy. So I can't see it being an issue in the foreseeable future.
Yeah. Okay, great. Moving on then to number 8, there were some changes in the laws around letting agents and fees, weren't there? Yeah. So A, can you tell us what they were? And then B, what you think that means this year?
So again, this is a big announcement from the government. We're going to ban all tenants' fees. So basically, letting agents can't charge fees to tenants. This is what the government say they're going to do. But of course,
so to be clear, they haven't done it yet.
The government haven't done it yet.
Because as soon as the government say they're going to do something, a lot of people think that means they've done it, or they react like they've done it.
Yeah. But they haven't done it. And importantly, the devil is always in the detail on these things. So they say they're going to do it.
So what have they said they're going to do specifically?
They say they're going to ban all fees which letting agents charge tenants.
Right.
So the tenants are just going to, you know, or it seemed like, because of course it was a bit of a headline, it seemed like they were just going to be able to charge rent and nothing else.
Yeah.
And of course, letting agents have to charge fees for, you know, when someone makes an application, take an application fee, they've got to reference them. Yeah. You're not going to let anyone in your property. There's a cost to referencing. There's, you know, maybe tenancy renewal fee. Well, there's a cost to the letting agent putting that tenancy renewal together. All that sort of stuff needs to be paid for. So the government's come out with this headline. There are loads of tenants. Oh yeah, playing to the gallery. You know, lots of the voting public rent houses. They go, well, that's good. You know, these nasty landlords, we need to control them and stop letting agents charging me tenancy fees because they're too high. And some of them may be too high. But of course, the market has to react in some way. And if letting agents and landlords can't make money, either A, they won't do it anymore, or B, they'll just put their prices up because it's a business and it has to be profitable, or the amount of those people offering that service will reduce until the price reaches a level that makes it attractive again.
Yeah.
Basic economics, basic supply and demand. So the market, will change. And you've already heard statements from different sections of the government saying that, well, actually, we might allow some letting agents fees as long as they reflect the cost incurred in providing the service. So maybe an application fee, costs the letting agency 50 quid, so they'll be able to charge the tenant 50 quid, but nothing on top. So that, to me, is already a change.
It's going to be difficult to police.
It will be difficult to police, but I think most letting agents will comply.
Yeah.
We'll have to comply. All the kind of bigger ones, the well-run ones will have to comply. But the first thing is, what are the rules going to really be, and are they going to be watered down? Probably. The next thing is, there's often a sort of workaround in these situations. This has been going on in Scotland for some time already. Letting tenancy fees in Scotland are already banned and have been for some time.
Yeah.
Letting agents have other mechanisms to recover those fees from the tenant. They might call it something else, or they may end up charging some more rent, or whatever it's going to be. The letting agent is still going to want to recover that from somewhere, and the landlord, again, needs to be paid for providing the service. They've got a mortgage to pay, all that sort of stuff. So letting agents are looking at the Scottish model at the moment, quite a few of them, including ourselves. But in addition, they're waiting to see what the rules actually say, because once it's clear what the rules are, they'll know exactly how to react. But they'll get the money back somewhere.
Yeah. Okay. So final two then, 9 and 10, are around two sectors within the property market that we've seen significant growth on, and you and I have moved into, is service accommodation and commercial property. And of course, there are different types of commercial property. Specifically, we like the conversion projects. You referenced that earlier. So let's finish on those two. So let's start with the service accommodation. Do you think that area is going to grow this year? And have you got any thoughts on just what might happen in 2017?
Well, I think serviced accommodation will continue to grow because more people, become aware of Airbnb. It's still penetrating. It's still growing. It's like Uber. It's a new thing.
It's disruptive.
It's like, Steve Jobs dies, the Apple iPhone continues to grow and more people continue to buy. And you kind of think, well, Steve Jobs is dead. But of course, they had all these little places in China still to penetrate that probably hadn't even heard of an Apple iPhone.
Massive momentum.
Massive momentum, and all these developing countries that still hadn't bought it.
Yeah.
So, you've got all that pipeline and that growth, inbuilt growth that's just waiting to happen on Airbnb or Booking.com. So serviced accommodation will continue to grow. Clearly there are some, legal challenges or some, kind of rules that are going to come in. Airbnb in London are limiting, short tenancies, or limiting the amount of time that you can rent your property out for an Airbnb if you haven't got planning permission. That hasn't happened across the rest of the country. It could come in, who knows?
Yeah.
But lots of people will apply for planning permission, get change of use or whatever. So I think that will continue to grow for sure, along with the HMO sector.
Yeah. I'm really interested in the tech side, and I study the companies and the CEOs behind these kind of platforms like Airbnb. And there's quite a lot of talk on possible plans for Airbnb to go into real estate. So there's discussions that maybe Airbnb will become a real estate agent, or they'll sell property, if you think they're quite well positioned for that. There's also talk of, I know that these are very nebulous stage at the moment. Also things like concierge. I mean, if you imagine you go to service accommodation and you can have a concierge service, but from the train station back and forth, almost sort of like an Uber service for Airbnb, or there may be a JV there. There's talk of you can go on Airbnb and you'll be able to ask what's in the fridge and have some little add-on services. So I think what Airbnb can do, not just reach more people who can rent out rooms in their houses, or reach more professional property investors who are buying properties specifically for HMO and service accommodation. There's more that service can add on for you as a you know, as an end user. And also, it's in a way, it's good because it's disrupting the hotel business. So it's going to make because hotel prices, they got pretty high in London. They went mad. I remember 7 years ago when I used to go down and do events, 100 quid a night, you'd get a great
5-star.
room. Yeah.
You get a really good room for 100. Yeah.
And now?
300 quid,
Yeah.
you know, for a 5-star. The Premier Inn, you know, next to King's Cross where we do a lot of our events, we're booking the staff in at 170, 180 pound a night.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable,
Yeah.
the price growth over the last 10 years in hotel rooms, especially around London.
Yeah.
I mean, a Premier Inn here in Peterborough is 70, 80 quid now for a travel lodge type of accommodation.
Yeah.
There's been huge growth.
And normally what you find with a lot of these technologies, like say Uber and Airbnb, is they grow because they disrupt a niche or an industry that hasn't been disrupted for decades, or has got a bit lazy, or has got a bit expensive. You know, like with taxis. I mean, it was the service of the taxi companies just never really changed for decades, and then all of a sudden they came in and the drivers are in suits and you get bottles of water, you know, and they're polite. And I'm not saying that all taxi drivers aren't. I'm not, but
they know their way around the black cabbies, but
they do, and many of them are great, but not all of them.
They're not all polite.
Because then they've got the review system, which means they've got to be polite.
Yeah. I've noticed even the black cabs now, they're saying
now they've had to up their game.
Please and thank you, and a lot of them are being a lot more polite because they're competing with the likes of Uber, which is, you know, in many ways it's great for the consumer. Yeah.
So this is likely Airbnb are going to continue to disrupt hotels, bed and breakfast, all of that. And so, you know, you might see a drop in those prices. You might see, you know, an increase in the services across the board. All right then. So as a business person or a property investor doing serviced accommodation, do you think that you'll see more people getting into that? Because, I mean, look, if you can get 100, 150 quid a night in a unit, you might have got £400 or £500 a month. You only need a few nights full.
I think that's absolutely true. I think there will be more people. You know, the tax changes will be the first thing. They've got a flat and all of a sudden they're going to be paying a hell of a lot more tax. But A, serviced accommodation is excluded, and B, they'll be making potentially a lot more cash flow on it. I think there'll be a lot of people attracted because of that. I think there'll be a lot of people sort of attracted because they found out about it, you know, and the extra revenue that they can glean from that sort of accommodation. I also think there's a lot more systems which are being built to deal with serviced accommodation, like Keygo, where, you know, the rooms are managed. And there's, you know, an accounting system and all that sort of stuff. So there's a lot more back end, and it's becoming more normalised.
There's also like cleaning services and people like that specifically
which historically,
because that's the hard bit,
isn't it?
That
can be the hard bit, along with the sheets and changing all that sort of stuff. And a really important part of this is the lenders, because of course you can't just take your flat that's mortgaged with, I don't know, the mortgage works and rent it out, you know, on a serviced accommodation basis. But I know of 2 lenders who will accept serviced accommodation units now, as long as you can prove the rentals that you've been getting, show them the evidence, you know, over a period of time, they'll lend against them. So I see that as a really positive step.
I think it's really important in property to have at least half an eye, maybe one eye, on tech, the future, and the more innovative and disruptive strategies. I think you should be very careful, not just go and sell all your single lets and dive into service accommodation before you've tested them.
Do one.
Yeah.
Do one.
Test one.
And test it for 6 months, get all the evidence, make sure it works, and then move them over in stages.
Yeah.
And then you can go big when you're absolutely sure it works. But don't, you know, do them all on that model, because like you say, you know, regulations might change, or, you know, there may be some councils get fed up because lots of the hotels rooms are empty, or whatever. Things change, don't they? So you don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah. And on this note of sort of the progression of the property market, which to me seems to have in many areas sped up a bit in 2016, I feel. Do you think there might be some landlords are going to jack in buy to let? I don't know, maybe they just want to sell their property and get out, sell their portfolio, and get out because of these tax changes, or they might want to move more into HMOs and service accommodation. Do you think there might be some portfolios to snap up?
I think most landlords most landlords will not have the time or the inclination to go and start doing HMOs or serviced accommodation. We love doing that, our community loves doing that, but they're hands-on and they're interested. Most landlords are passive investors. They don't really get involved. Maybe they rent it, maybe they manage it themselves, but a lot of them just use a letting agent. Those people are going to be the ones that haven't been to see the accountant, maybe don't qualify for a lot of these reliefs. They're going to probably wait till the end of 2018 when they put their tax return in for April 17, April 18, and they're suddenly going to notice that they're paying a bit more tax, or they won't, and it will get progressively worse into 19, end of 20, and then I think it's 2021 where the full effect of this is going to be introduced, because it's only 25%, 50, 75, 100%. The effect of this is coming in over 4 years. So I think more and more landlords will progressively see that they're in this hole and they're paying more tax than they're getting in income. Start asking their accountant what's going on. Their accountant will say, well, these are the new rules. And quite a lot of them are just going to throw the towel in and just say, I want rid of my portfolio.
And if they've had a bit of growth, that helps with the decision.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's, most of those guys are going to have had really, really good growth over the years. So they're going to exit. Some of them are going to be forced down that road because they're not even going to have enough money to pay the tax. Some are going to get repossessed. You're likely to see whole portfolios coming on the market because of this change, because the government is effectively uprooting, all of those private buy-to-lets that are in individual names, corralling us all into limited companies. Maybe they think they can control and maybe they think they can tax those better, who knows. But a lot of people, they won't do that, and they'll end up losing their portfolio either by selling or maybe the bank will push them over and make them sell, and you're going to see portfolios come to the market. Which
could be a good opportunity to buy them.
There's a great opportunity there. Yeah. I generally don't buy individual units because of the amount of time involved, but you know what? If someone brought us a portfolio of 50 properties, I'd be quite interested in that. Because I could put a lot of capital to work quite quickly, and it's a much better use of time. I'd be really interested in that.
Okay. And then finally, let's talk about commercial conversions. Recently, over the last 2 or 3 years, there's been some planning relaxations. You and I are predominantly now buying commercial and changing the use and, developing flats and rooms. So do you think that there's going to still be more opportunities to convert, change of use? What do you think?
Well, there's less office buildings available now than there were in 2010, 11, 12, because a lot of them have been converted, but they're still coming on.
And that's obviously in Peterborough, not necessarily UK?
Well, across the whole UK, but certainly in Peterborough there are less. It's just a fact.
So does that mean we did good to get in and do it while we could?
It was a great thing to use those permitted development rights to convert office. It doesn't mean to say that there aren't more offices coming on, because there are. There are still offices coming on, and you can still convert them and you can still make money out of them. But there are still loads of other buildings coming to the market that require planning permission in the traditional way, like pubs or like, old nightclubs, loads of those, or care homes or, community buildings, all this stuff which we buy a lot of, which can be converted into, say, rooms or flats. So there's still a big opportunity there, and that will just continue as the use dies out for whatever it was that it was being used for. Generally, commercial buildings, over time, against inflation, drop in value. Whereas residential rises. It's a weird thing to get your head around.
The thing is, a residential use, for 100 years, it's the same thing. But commercial, all the fittings, the fixtures, everything else, 10 years, it's all out of date. You've got new aircon, new lights, new everything else. And it's more of an income-based thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is an income-based thing. So because commercial depreciates towards and towards the end of its life, and it's worth less, then that means often you can buy them cheap and then convert them.
So it's the change of use that gives you the best leverage.
The change of use gives you great leverage. In addition to that, I think there's new stuff on the way. I think there are new permitted development rights coming.
Right.
For more use classes. They obviously already did offices. They did agricultural buildings. And there was B8 use as well, some warehousing and some retail. But I suspect some of those areas will be extended into possibly 17, 18. But critically, this white paper that is coming out on housing shortly is clearly looking at planning as the central pillar of, you know, reform in the housing market to ungum it and to create more supply and go some way to fixing the housing crisis. You know, creating availability of more homes. So I think a big part of that planning relaxation will be more permitted development rights and really allowing developers to take existing buildings and convert them into residential.
Yeah, and something that's rarely talked about people, which would probably be a good thing to finish on, is time use and opportunity cost of time and leverage of time. And you don't really like doing single lets anymore because it might take you 10 times as long to do 38 single let units as one building you can convert into 38 individual units, for example. So do you think people should be thinking more about how they value their time or the opportunity cost of their time doing something else?
I think it's a massive part of any business and your life. You need to be looking at what you're spending your time on through the day and creating the maximum income generating time. So, you know, what are you doing for this hour? How much income does that generate you? If you're doing a big building where you're converting 20 units and it takes you 10 times as long as doing one single let, well, you've achieved 20 times the results probably and more, you know, but you've only spent 10 times as long. That's got to be a good return on time invested. And I'm always focusing on activities like that because I realise the biggest bottleneck I have is my time. Whereas years ago it used to be the money to do something or the idea or, you know, having the experience. Now it's my time.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Mark. So I hope you enjoyed our top 10 property predictions for 2017. We'd love you to give your thoughts. Let's have a discussion. Do you agree with any? Do you disagree with any? Have we missed any that you might want to add, or are there any you want to discuss further or you want to get any more information on? So if you just search Progressive Property or Rob Moore or Mark Homer in Twitter or Facebook, you can find our various pages, groups, communities. We have podcasts as well if you search our names that you can find. And so we'd just love to keep the debate going and hear your thoughts too. So Mark, thanks for investing and sharing your time in the predictions. And let's keep the debate going. Thank you very much.